Have you ever noticed that there's a one category in life that seems to always cause arguments? I'm talking about superheroes, right? I got my man right here, the Hulk. He's not my favorite superhero, but he's all that I could find, and so you're gonna have to put up with him for the rest of this video. He's gonna be hanging out with me. Or I got this right here, check this out. We got the entire Marvel fam right here. Love them so much. They're better than DC, in my opinion. But here's the deal, superheroes cause arguments, or more specifically, superhero movies, right? It feels like you're either a Marvel fan or you're a DC fan, and on either side, people let you know if they disagree with the one that you pick. And either way, it seems like most people love superheroes. In fact, superhero movies are some of the largest grossing movies ever. Why is that? I honestly think people love a good hero because of what they do, right? They solve a problem. They fight the bad guys. They're brave. They can do some crazy cool stuff. Basically, they see something wrong in the world and they go do something about it in the most epic way possible. And maybe we love superhero movies because we all love the idea of superheroes existing in our real world. Like, let's be real. We could all use a little superhero help from time to time. If this guy stepped into my situation and rescued me, like, it'd be pretty cool. And so here's the deal. There are times in life where we just wish that someone would do something to help us out, to make things change, or to make things better, to solve a problem, to do something. Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. Not superheroes, we're not talking about the Hulk. We're talking about some of the biggest areas in life where we all wish that someone would just do something. And we're going to talk about some things in the world that they're not quite right. The things that seem unfair. The stuff that we may name as injustice. And so here's a question. When I say the word injustice, what comes to mind? You see, justice simply means something that is right, fair, or equal. And so injustice is really just the opposite of that. And so when we talk about injustice, we're talking about the things in our world that are not right, they're unfair, or they're unequal. And for most of us, something probably came to mind the minute you heard the word injustice. And so maybe it was something big like big and global, human trafficking, or global poverty, or world hunger. Maybe it was something local that feels so unfair and it's right around the corner from you. Maybe you're experiencing a kind of injustice personally. Something comes to mind for all of us. In fact, that's one of the things that I love and really admire about Gen Z. You guys, maybe more than any generation in history, are aware of injustices happening in the world. And the real question we all face is not, does injustice exist? The question is this, why doesn't somebody do something? And that's the question that we're going to be wrestling with for the rest of this series. What does it look like? And whose job is it to do something about injustice? And so maybe you've experienced injustice yourself, or you've seen it. And you've even found yourself asking the question, why doesn't somebody do something about that? Maybe you've even found yourself asking some questions that you've never asked before. Questions like this, why are there some students that never get in trouble when they should, while other students always get in trouble even if they're not doing anything wrong? That second one was usually me, just saying. Well, why do people still act like it's okay to make jokes that are racist or sexist? Why does that guy continue to be bullied, but no one seems to care enough to do anything about it? Why does one person in our friend group go home to a house that feels unsafe while others don't have to worry about it? Why are there so many young kids in our community who don't get to eat full meals if school is out? Why are 3 meals a day not normal for everybody? And my point is this, when we see injustice, it makes us ask some hard questions. It makes us wonder how others don't see it or how we didn't see it before. And it's not that we don't care about injustice. I honestly think sometimes we don't do anything about injustice because we actually don't get close enough to see what's really happening and ask the hard questions. And you know what? We're actually not the first to have this problem. In fact, Jesus made a habit of pointing out a lot of things that people hadn't seen before. You see, one of the questions that people asked Jesus a lot was, who's cool with you and who's not? That's obviously a paraphrase, but they asked Jesus this kind of question in a lot of different ways. And like Jesus did in many conversations, he answers with a story. And so in the case we're about to dive into in the book of Matthew, he uses a story of sheep and goats to explain the difference between the righteous and the unrighteous. Those on the right side and those on the wrong side. Or if you want to think back to superheroes, we got the good guys, we got the bad guys. You got, Batman and the Joker. Pick your superhero and pick your villain. Jesus was simply trying to make it clear that there were two categories here. And again, since flocks and shepherds were part of life in ancient Israel, everyone would have been familiar with this example. And so again, the question presented to Jesus is, who's cool with you? Who's in good standing with you? Who is on the right side and who is on the wrong side? And in this story, the sheep are on the right or the righteous side and the goats are not. So listen to what Jesus says to the goats. This is Matthew chapter 25, verse 41 to 46. It says, "Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me.' They also will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?' He will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me.' Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life." And so in this story, Jesus distinguishes between the righteous and the unrighteous by how they responded to the needs of the least of these, whom Jesus defines as the prisoners, the hungry, the sick, the strangers. In other words, people who need the most help, feel the most pain, or get the worst treatment. Now that may seem a little bit extreme. Like, is Jesus really this mad because they don't give somebody some water? I mean, listen to the level of shock that the goats, or those who he would call unrighteous, expressed in their response to the king. Right? They're like, "When did we not see you? When did we not clothe you or feed you or give you water?" It's as if they're saying, "Not me. I would never do that." And he hadn't physically been hungry or thirsty or in prison, but the king, Jesus wants to make a point. He says, "Not only did you not do something about the injustice, but you didn't even see it." When you don't see those who need your help, you're not just missing out on seeing injustice. When we don't see it, Jesus takes personal offense as if we don't see him. And you're missing out on what it means to follow Jesus himself. And so Jesus makes this point. My people are people who see and act when it comes to injustice. And now that's not to say that that's what it takes to start a relationship with Jesus, to just be good and do good to people. But I am saying that if you actually get to know Jesus, right, you have a relationship with him, you begin to know him, you'll see that Jesus always cares about injustice. He always speaks up for others, and he always fights for what's right. And if you follow him, the goal, the point is to become more like him in that way. And we begin to care about the things that Jesus cares about. And because of Jesus' example, you may begin to see injustice differently than you ever have before. You may be compelled to do something more than ever before. But before we get to talking about doing something, we need to start here. Before you do something about injustice, you have to see it. And that's where we need to start, right? We need to be able to look around and see what's happening. We need to be able to notice the injustices in our daily world. we all have room to grow in this. And so here are 3 simple things that we can do together in order to see injustice. And the first is this: get close enough to see. Well, how do we do this? Well, there's a few things that we can do. For starters, we can actually pray that God would help us see the way that he sees. God, give me your eyes. Help me see the world the way that you do. Right? And then maybe spend some time with people who are different than you. And this doesn't come natural to any of us. Like, we naturally gravitate toward people who are like us. In order to see what's going on in the world, you have to get to know people in the world, not just in your circle. And so get close enough to see. Maybe strike up a conversation with someone in your class, or get a job that will help you meet people outside your school, or volunteer somewhere. Put yourself on the path to interact with different people. See the world from someone else's eyes. Watch a movie about injustice. Start discovering what's happening in the world and in your community. Get close enough to see. Number 2, we can be curious enough to listen. You see, the quickest way to see injustice is to listen to the people experiencing it. And so when someone tells you about experiencing injustice, listen. And don't just listen, but try to learn. Like, try to imagine yourself in their shoes. Think about what they're saying. And here's a heads up: it will make you uncomfortable, especially if it's a kind of injustice that you've never experienced, or worse, the kind that you didn't realize that you actually have participated in. And this is when the conversation gets real, and it may actually be tempted to bounce, like, nope, don't want to be a part of that conversation at all. We're wired as a survival instinct to avoid being uncomfortable. I mean, like, let's be real. Some of you act like you're gonna die if you have to talk to someone on an actual phone instead of texting. And if I can be honest with you, I'm the exact same way. Why? Because it's uncomfortable, and we hate being uncomfortable. But in this case, discomfort isn't necessarily bad. It's actually a good sign when bad things make you uncomfortable, because that means that you're beginning to see things the way that God sees them. And so keep listening, try to learn. And when you hear about injustice, be curious, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. Be curious about your own experience too. Right? Maybe you'll notice that you've experienced an injustice, but you've brushed it off because everybody around you keeps saying it's no big deal. Or maybe you'll notice that you've participated in injustice without realizing it. You can't know what you'll discover until you get curious. Be open to what God may be doing in you. And then number 3 is this: be courageous enough to name it. And so that means that if it's wrong, say it's wrong. If it's unfair, call it out. When you see injustice around you, or even in you, be courageous enough to call it what it is. Identifying injustice takes away some of the power, because we can't change what isn't seen, acknowledged, or talked about. And this may be the hardest part for you. It's honestly, it's risky, it's awkward, and it's uncomfortable. But it's important, because once we name injustice, we also actually feel ownership and the responsibility to do something about it. Now listen, man, so much of following Jesus is learning to see, think, and live in a way that's not natural to us. You see, one of the things that I love about this generation, as I said, is that so many of you actually see and care about injustice more than previous generations. And here's what I'm getting at. You can be the generation to do something in areas where it has seemed impossible in the past. But the first step to doing something is seeing it and helping others see it too. And so I want you to think about this quote from Maya Angelou, who's a famous writer. She wrote about injustice often. She says this. She says, "Do the best that you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." And honestly, that's kind of what this series is about. Seeing better so we can know better and ultimately do better. Not because Maya Angelou tells us to do this, but because this is the way of Jesus. The goal of the Christian life is to make disciples, but also to become more and more like Christ every single day, to see the world that the way that he sees the world, that our hearts would break for the things that break his heart. And so doing something about injustice is part of living the journey of being a follower of Jesus. But before we can do something about injustice, you have to see it.